In Lagos, a rich man named Mr. Duro Jay lived in a giant mansion. Every weekend, he hosted lavish parties with tables full of delicious food. People admired his generosity and loved attending his gatherings. But there was one thing everyone found strange. Mr. Duro Jay never ate anything, not even a sip of water. He simply walked around, smiling, greeting his guests. Despite this, he always looked fresh and healthy, with glowing skin and a youthful appearance. People whispered about it, wondering if it was magic, a secret diet, or something more mysterious. Whatever it was, nobody dared to ask. The rumors about Mr. Durojaiye spread far and wide. Maybe he has a magical drink, someone said. Perhaps he doesn't need food, others guessed. But a few whispered darker theories. What if his wealth and health came from something unnatural, they said quietly. Little Tunde, a curious boy, asked his father, "Why doesn't Mr. Durojaiye eat?" His father chuckled nervously. "Don't worry about that, Tunde," he replied. But Tunde kept wondering. He wasn't the only one. Many people in Lagos found Mr. Durojaiye's habits strange, but nobody had the courage to investigate. A brave journalist named Zikora decided to uncover the truth. She loved solving mysteries and writing stories about them. Zikora heard all the rumors about Mr. Durojaiye and found them fascinating. Why does he never eat? She thought. And how does he stay so healthy? She was determined to find answers. She decided to attend one of his famous parties. If I watch him closely, I will discover his secret, Zikora thought. She dressed in her finest outfit, grabbed her notepad and a camera, and went to Mr. Durojaiye's mansion, ready to solve the mystery of the man who never ate. The mansion was even grander than Zikora imagined. Bright lights decorated the house, and music filled the air. The dining tables were covered with dishes of jollof rice, pepper soup, suya, and desserts. Guests laughed and ate happily, but Zikora kept her eyes on Mr. Durojaiye. He moved gracefully from one group to another, smiling and talking, but never eating, not even a small bite. Zikora whispered to herself. His glowing skin and confident posture made it even stranger. Zikora decided to stay until the party ended. I will find out what happens when everyone leaves, she thought. As the night grew quiet and the guests began to leave, Zikora hid behind a curtain in the dining hall. The room was now empty except for Mr. Durojaiye. He sat at the head of the long table, surrounded by untouched plates of leftover food. Zikora's heart raced as she waited in silence. Suddenly, the air in the room changed. Shadows began to move. At first, Zikora thought it was just the flickering of the candlelight, but these shadows didn't behave like ordinary ones. They twisted and danced across the room, growing larger and darker with each passing moment. Zikora's eyes widened and she watched the shadows creep towards the table. Slowly, they surrounded the plates of leftover food. Then, to her shock, the food began to vanish. The shadows consumed it piece by piece until the plates were empty. Zikora covered her mouth to keep from gasping aloud. The shadows seemed alive, like dark creatures with a purpose. Mr. Durojaiye remained calm, sitting still with a mysterious smile on his face. It was as if the shadows were his companions eating for him. Zikora felt a chill run down her spine. She had never seen anything like this before. As Zikora tried to steady her nerves, her camera slipped from her hand and made a soft click sound. Mr. Durojaiye's head turned sharply in her direction. "Who is there?" he called out, his voice cold and sharp. The shadows, as if sensing her presence, began to stretch towards the curtain where she was hiding. Zikora froze, her heart pounding like a drum. She knew she couldn't outrun the shadows if they found her. Just as they reached the curtain, a loud bang came from the kitchen. A pot had fallen, breaking the tense silence. The shadows paused, distracted. Seizing the moment, Zikora slipped out of her hiding spot and dashed towards the door. She ran as fast as her legs could carry her, not daring to look back. When she finally reached the safety of her home, she collapsed onto her bed, shaking with fear. She couldn't stop thinking about what she had seen. What are those shadows, she wondered, and why do they eat instead of him? Zikora knew she had stumbled upon something dark and dangerous. She decided she needed more proof before she could tell anyone, but she she couldn't face it alone. The next morning, Zikora visited Mama Ibeji, an elderly woman who was a regular guest at Mr. Durojaiye's parties. "Mama, do you ever feel strange after attending his feast?" Zikora asked. Mama Ibeji frowned and nodded slowly. "Yes, my child," she said. "After every party, I feel weak, like my strength has been taken away." Zikora's eyes widened. "Do you think it's because he doesn't eat?" she asked. Mama Ibeji sighed. "I don't know, but there is something unnatural about that man," she said. Zikora realized she wasn't the only one who felt something was wrong. Zikora decided to speak to more people who attended Mr. Durojaiye's parties. The stories were similar. One man said, "I always feel tired after his feast, as if my energy has been drained." Another woman added, "It's strange. The parties are fun, but I feel weaker every time." Zikora wrote down their words in her notebook. Something is happening to these people, she thought. Their energy is disappearing, but how? The pieces of the puzzle were coming together, but Zikora knew she needed to return to the mansion to learn the full truth. She had to be brave. On the evening of another party, Zikora decided to return to Mr. Durojaiye's mansion. This time, she hid in the garden outside. From there, she could see through the large windows into the dining hall. The party was in full swing and guests laughed and ate happily. But Zikora noticed something strange. The shadows on the walls seemed to move on their own. They flickered and twisted even though no one else seemed to see them. "They are waiting," Zikora thought. Her heart raced as she realized the shadows only became active after the party ended. She stayed hidden, determined to see what would happen. After the last guest left, the room fell silent. Zikora watched as Mr. Durojaiye entered the dining room and sat down at the head of the table again. Just like before, the shadows grew darker and began to move. They stretched towards the leftover food, devouring it piece by piece. Zikora's fear grew, but so did her curiosity. What are these shadows? She wondered. Why do they eat instead of him? She took out her camera to capture the moment, but as the flash went off, the shadows paused, and Mr. Durojaiye turned towards the window, sensing her presence again. Zikora quickly ducked out of sight. She held her breath, hoping Mr. Durojaiye wouldn't come outside. She peeked through the bushes and saw him scanning the room. His eyes were sharp and cold. The shadows swirled around him protectively, like they were alive. After a tense moment, Mr. Durojaiye sat back down and the shadows resumed their feast. Zikora's hands trembled as she clutched her camera. "This is more than I expected," she thought. "These shadows are real and they are dangerous." She crept away from the mansion, her mind racing with questions about what she had just witnessed. The next day, Zikora wrote an article about what she had seen. She described the moving shadows and how they devoured food while Mr. Durojaiye sat silently. The newspaper published her story and it spread quickly across Lagos. Some people believed her, saying it explained why they felt weak after every parties. Others laughed, calling it a silly ghost story. But Durojaiye wasn't laughing. He read the article and smiled darkly. "She's clever," he said to himself, "but she doesn't know the full truth." The shadows around him flickered as if laughing along with him. Strange things began to happen in Lagos. Many people who had attended Mr. Durojaiye's parties started falling ill. They felt weak, tired, and couldn't explain why. Doctors were baffled, unable to find out the cause. Panic spread through the city and more people began to believe Zikora's story. Something is draining their energy, Zikora thought. But what? She decided to dig deeper into Mr. Durojaiye's past. Maybe his secret lies in where he came from, she reasoned. She visited an old neighborhood and asked questions, hoping to discover clues about the mysterious man who never ate. During her investigation, Zikora heard about an old herbalist named Baba Efun. He was said to know ancient secrets and the truth about supernatural beings. If anyone can explain the shadows, it's him, Zikora thought. She traveled to Baba Efun's remote hut and told him everything she had seen. The old man listened carefully, his face growing serious. "What you describe as shadow spirits," he said. "They are bound to a man who made a terrible deal. They gave him wealth and power, but they feed on the life force of others." Zikora felt a chill run down her spine. "How can I stop them?" Zikora asked. Baba Efun opened a small wooden box and handed her a bottle of white powder. "This powder will weaken the shadows," he said. "Sprinkle it where they gather. But be warned, they will not go down without a fight. You must be strong and careful." Zikora nodded. clutching the bottle tightly. "Thank you, Baba Efun," she said. As she walked away, she felt both fear and determination. She had the tool to fight the shadows, but she knew the battle ahead would not be easy. That night, Zikora returned to Mr. Durojaiye's mansion. She waited until the party ended and the guests left. Then she crept inside, clutching the bottle of powder. The dining hall was quiet and the leftover food sat untouched. Suddenly, the air grew cold and the shadows began to move. Zikora's heart pounded as she sprinkled the powder on the floor. The shadows hissed and twisted, shrinking back from the powder as if it burned them. Mr. Durojaiye appeared in the doorway, his face twisted with anger. "What are you doing?" he shouted. The shadows swirled protectively around him. "I know your secret," Zikora yelled, throwing more powder. The shadows shrinked, their forms growing weaker. Mr. Durojaiye lunged toward her, but the powder stopped him in his tracks. "You don't understand," he said, his voice desperate. "Without them, I will die." The shadows writhed, trying to escape the powder's reach, but Zikora was relentless. She threw the last powder and the shadows dissolved into nothing. With a final chilling scream, Mr. Durojaiye collapsed to the floor, his body frail and pale. The room grew silent and Zikora stood there, shaken but victorious. The next morning, the city woke up to a strange calm. People who had been sick suddenly felt better, as if their energy had returned. Zikora wrote a final article explaining everything that had happened. She described the shadow spirits, their connection to Mr. Durojaiye, and how she had defeated them. The story shocked the city and people praised Zikora for her bravery. But as for Mr. Durojaiye, he disappeared. Some said he fled Lagos, too ashamed to face the world without his shadows. Others believed he had perished. But Zikora knew one thing: Lagos was safe again. Days passed and the city returned to normal. But Zikora couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't quite right. She kept replaying the events in her mind. The shadows, Mr. Durojaiye's desperate plea, and his sudden disappearance. What if he's still out there, she wondered. Zikora tried to focus on her work, but strange dreams began to haunt her. In them, she saw Mr. Durojaiye, frail and pale, wandering through dark alleys. The shadows whispered his name, calling him back. Zikora woke up each time drenched in sweat, unsure if the dreams were a warning or just her imagination. One evening, Zikora received a strange envelope with no return address. Inside was a single note that read, "You don't understand the curse you've unleashed." Her heart skipped a beat. Who had sent this message? Was it Mr. Durojaiye? She looked around her small apartment, suddenly feeling like she was being watched. Determined not to let fear control her, Zikora decided to investigate further. If there's more to this story, I have to find out, she thought. She retraced her steps, revisiting Baba Efun to ask if the shadows could ever return. His answer left her uneasy. The shadows are destroyed, but the curse lingers, Baba Efun said. Mr. Durojaiye's deal was not just with the shadows, it was with something far greater. Until the pact is fully broken, the danger remains. Zikora's stomach sank. "What do I have to do?" she asked. Baba Efun handed her an old map with strange symbols. "Find the place where the pact was made. Only there can you end it completely." Zikora stared at the map, realizing it pointed to a remote village deep in the forest. She took a deep breath, knowing this journey would be her most dangerous yet. Early the next morning, Zikora packed her bag and set off for the village. The journey was long and difficult. She traveled by bus, then by motorbike, and finally on foot through a dense forest. The air grew colder as she walked, and the trees seemed to close in around her. The map led her to an abandoned shrine, its walls covered in strange carvings. As she stepped inside, a chill ran through her body. The room felt alive, humming with energy. In the center was a stone altar. On it lay a small glowing orb. Zikora's hands trembled. As Zikora approached the altar, she heard a voice behind her. "You shouldn't have come." She spun around to see Mr. Durojaiye standing in the shadows. He looked weak, his once glowing skin now grey and lifeless. "This place is the source of my curse," he said. "I made a deal here long ago, and now you've made it worse." Zikora stepped back, clutching the map. "I destroyed the shadows," she said. Mr. Durojaiye shook his head. "The shadows are just servants. The real power lies within this shrine, and now that you're here, it knows you too." Before Zikora could respond, the shrine began to shake. The carvings on the walls glowed faintly, and a low rumble filled the air. A deep, otherworldly voice echoed through the room. "Who dares disturb me?" it boomed. Zikora froze, realizing she was now face to face with the true force behind the curse. Mr. Durojaiye fell to his knees, pleading. "Please, I've done everything you asked," he cried. The voice ignored him, turning its attention to Zikora. "You destroyed my shadows," it said, "but you have not undone the pact." Zikora's mind raced. How could she stop this ancient force? "Tell me how to break the pact," Zikora shouted, trying to steady her voice. The voice laughed, a sound that sent chills down her spine. "The pact can only be broken by a sacrifice," it said. "One life for the lives that were taken." Mr. Durojaiye looked up, fear in his eyes. "She's the one who destroyed your shadows," he said desperately. "Take her instead of me." Zikora glared at him. "You caused this," she yelled. "You made the deal." The voice chuckled. "Decide quickly," it said. "One of you must stay, or the curse will spread." Zikora's mind raced. She thought of all the people in Lagos who had suffered because of the curse. She looked at Mr. Durojaiye, who had caused so much pain but now seemed like a broken man. "I won't let this curse spread," she said firmly. She stepped forward, placing her hand on the altar. "Take me," she said. The voice paused, as if considering her offer, but before it could respond, Mr. Durojaiye lunged forward. "No," he shouted. "This is my curse to bear." He placed his hands on the altar, and a blinding light filled the room. When the light faded, Zikora opened her eyes and found herself outside the shrine. The forest was silent, and the shrine had crumbled into ruins. Mr. Durojaiye was gone, and the map in her hand had turned to ash. She stood there trying to process what had happened. Somehow, he had sacrificed himself to break the pact. Zikora felt a strange mix of relief and sadness. The curse was over, but Mr. Durojaiye had paid the ultimate price. She turned and began the long journey back to Lagos. Her heart heavy, but her mission was complete. Back in Lagos, the city felt brighter. People who had been sick were now healthy, and the strange weakness that had plagued them was gone. Zikora wrote the final chapter of her story, sharing the truth about Mr. Durojaiye's sacrifice and the ancient pact that had cost him. Her bravery was celebrated, but she felt no joy in her victory. Some stories don't have happy endings, she thought. As she walked through the bustling street, she looked up at the sky and whispered, "Rest in peace, Mr. Durojaiye." And with that, she moved forward, leaving the shadows behind. Thank you for watching. If you got to this point, please give this video a thumbs up. It will help grow my small YouTube channel. If you haven't subscribed, please do well to subscribe and turn on post notifications so you get notified when I post more interesting contents like this. Please leave your thoughts in the comment section. Let me know about your thoughts on this story and what you feel about the video. Please do well to watch my other contents and videos on different stories. They are interesting as well. See you guys in my next video. Bye.